Right now, somewhere in a hospital, a woman is giving birth. There's a doctor, there's an epidural, there's a heart rate monitor beeping steadily in the background. If anything goes wrong, and I mean anything, there is a team of people trained for exactly that moment. Now take all of that away. No doctor, no clean water, no painkillers, no way to stop bleeding, no way to know if the baby is turned the wrong way until it's already too late. Just a woman, alone or with maybe one or two other women, in a cave, a hut, or under the open sky. This was childbirth for over 99% of human history, and today we're going to walk through exactly what it looked like, the pain, the danger, the strange rituals, and the brutal numbers behind it. By the end of this video, you'll never look at a delivery room the same way again. Before we get into how ancient humans handled it, we need to understand why it was so dangerous to begin with, because the answer is actually built into our own bodies. Human babies are born with unusually large heads compared to other animals. This is because of our big brains. But here's the problem. The human female pelvis can only widen so much before it starts affecting how efficiently a woman can walk and run. So evolution found a compromise. Human babies are born earlier, less developed than almost any other mammal, and the pelvis is just barely wide enough for the head to pass through. Scientists actually have a name for this, the obstetrical dilemma. It means human childbirth has always been tight, difficult, and dangerous, even under perfect conditions. Add in no medical intervention, no way to see what's happening inside the body, and no way to stop severe bleeding, and you start to understand why ancient childbirth was one of the leading causes of death for young women throughout almost all of human history. Some anthropologists estimate that in prehistoric and early agricultural societies, somewhere between 10 to 30% of women died from complications related to pregnancy or childbirth during their lifetime. Let that sink in. Not 10 to 30% of births, 10 to 30% of women across their reproductive years. So if there were no doctors, who helped a woman give birth? The answer, other women. Anthropological studies of hunter-gatherer societies, from the Hadza in Tanzania to indigenous groups in the Amazon, show a consistent pattern. Childbirth was almost always attended by experienced older women, often the mother, grandmother, aunts, or simply the most experienced women in the group. These women functioned as the community's midwives long before that word existed. They didn't have formal training in the way we understand it today, but they had something just as valuable: repetition. A woman who had witnessed dozens of births over her lifetime learned to recognize danger signs: a baby turned the wrong way, bleeding that wouldn't stop, labor that dragged on too long, even if she had no idea why those things were happening biologically. In many societies, becoming a trusted birth attendant wasn't something you trained for formally. It was a role you grew into simply by being present over and over at the most vulnerable moments of other women's lives. Some groups also believed men should be kept away entirely, sometimes for spiritual reasons, sometimes simply because there was nothing useful for them to do. In many ancient cultures, the birthing space itself was treated as sacred or dangerous, a threshold between life and death, and only women who had been through it themselves were allowed to enter. In ancient Mesopotamia, texts and clay tablets reference incantations spoken over laboring women, invoking protective spirits believed to guard against the demon Lamashtu, who was thought to specifically target mothers and infants. In ancient Greece, midwives were often older women who had already given birth themselves. Greek medical writers believed a woman who hadn't experienced labor couldn't truly understand how to guide someone else through it. This belief that lived experience mattered more than theoretical knowledge shaped who was allowed anywhere near a birthing woman for centuries. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. Ancient women rarely gave birth lying flat on their backs. That position is actually a relatively modern convention, largely adopted because it made things easier for doctors to see and assist, not because it was easier for the mother. Instead, most ancient and indigenous birthing traditions favored squatting, using gravity to help the baby descend, kneeling, often supported by another woman standing behind, Birthing stools, carved wooden or stone seats with a hole in the middle, found in archaeological sites from ancient Egypt to Mesopotamia, and sometimes even standing while holding onto a rope, a tree branch, or another person's shoulders. Some cultures even used birthing huts built slightly apart from the main living space, specifically designed with these upright positions in mind. For pain, there was no morphine, no epidural. What they had was certain herbs believed to ease pain or speed labor, though many had little real effect and some were dangerous. Heat from hot stones or heated water applied to the lower back and abdomen, and physical support, since women were rarely left to labor completely alone. Someone would apply pressure, help them change positions, or simply hold them. And when things went wrong, a baby stuck, breech, or a placenta that wouldn't fully deliver, there was very little anyone could do. If a baby was positioned feet first or sideways, an experienced attendant might try to manually turn the baby from outside the abdomen, a risky technique with no guarantee of success. If labor stalled for too long, exhaustion alone could kill the mother before the baby was ever born, and postpartum hemorrhage, heavy bleeding after delivery, was one of the single biggest killers because there was simply no way to replace lost blood or reliably stop the bleeding once it started. This is the brutal truth. Complications that are now routine, 5-minute procedures were, for most of human history, a death sentence. Let's talk data, because the scale of this is hard to grasp until you see it in numbers. Historical and paleodemographic research suggests that in pre-modern societies, maternal mortality rates were often somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 deaths per 100,000 live births. In some populations facing famine, poor nutrition, or particularly difficult conditions, estimates run even higher. For comparison, the maternal mortality rate in most developed countries today is under 20 per 100,000. That means an ancient or early historical woman was roughly 50 to 100 times more likely to die from childbirth than a woman today. And it wasn't just the mother at risk. Infant mortality was staggering too. In many ancient and pre-industrial societies, historians estimate that anywhere from a quarter to half of all children died before reaching adulthood, and a significant portion of those deaths happened in the first days or weeks of life. Some researchers who've studied burial sites from ancient and medieval periods note a disturbing pattern. Infant graves are strikingly common, a quiet, physical record of just how often birth ended in loss rather than survival. This is part of why many ancient cultures had customs of not naming a baby immediately, sometimes waiting days, weeks, or even longer. It wasn't coldness, it was emotional self-protection in a world where survival was never guaranteed. Because childbirth was so dangerous and so mysterious, nearly every ancient culture wrapped it in ritual. In ancient Egypt, women sometimes gave birth in specially built structures called birthhouses, and prayers were made to Taweret, a goddess depicted as part hippopotamus, believed to protect mothers and children during delivery. Amulets bearing her image were kept close during labor, and depictions of her have been found in homes across ancient Egyptian society, suggesting how universal the fear surrounding childbirth truly was. In parts of ancient Rome, amulets and charms were used to ward off evil spirits believed to target vulnerable newborns and mothers, and certain days were even considered luckier than others for a birth to take place. Many indigenous cultures across the world observed strict isolation periods after birth, the mother and baby kept apart from the rest of the community for days or weeks, partly for physical recovery and partly because birth was seen as a spiritually powerful, even dangerous threshold moment. In some traditions, this isolation period doubled as one of the only times a new mother was fully excused from labor and daily chores, giving her body real time to heal in a way that wasn't always guaranteed once she rejoined the group. None of these rituals could actually stop bleeding or fix a breech birth, but they served a real purpose. They gave people a sense of control over something that was, in truth, almost entirely out of their hands. Here's the twist most people don't expect. Ancient birth attendants weren't ignorant. Many of the things modern maternity care rediscovered in the last 50 years upright birthing positions, continuous emotional support during labor, delayed cord cutting were standard practice in traditional societies for thousands of years. Modern medicine spent much of the 20th century moving away from these practices, putting women flat on their backs, sedating them heavily, and separating birth support from emotional care, before eventually realizing that many of the old ways actually produced better outcomes when combined with modern safety nets like sterile tools and the ability to intervene in emergencies. Research into continuous labor support, essentially having a trained companion present throughout labor, much like ancient birth attendants provided, has repeatedly shown shorter labors and better outcomes, a finding that essentially confirms what experienced women in traditional societies already understood instinctively. In other words, ancient humans didn't have the medicine to fix true emergencies, but in terms of positioning, pain management through movement, and psychological support, some of what they knew was genuinely ahead of its time. So why does any of this matter now, in an age of hospitals and modern medicine? Because maternal mortality is still not solved everywhere. In parts of the world today, particularly regions with limited access to medical care, women still face risks that echo the ancient world, not because we lack the knowledge, but because access to that knowledge and care isn't equal everywhere. The gap between what's medically possible and what's actually available is, in many places, still a matter of life and death. Understanding how brutal this process was for nearly all of human history also puts something else in perspective. Every single one of us is descended from an unbroken chain of women who survived this. Not most women, but every single one of your direct maternal ancestors, going back tens of thousands of years, lived through childbirth successfully at least once. That's not a small thing. That's the entire reason any of us exist at all. So next time someone complains about a hospital waiting room or a slightly too bright delivery room light, remember what it used to take. No epidurals, no sterile tools, no emergency C-sections, just a woman, her body, and whoever she trusted enough to be in the room with her. If this blew your mind, you'll want to see the video where I break down how many children the average ancient woman actually had. The numbers are even crazier than you'd think. Hit subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into what life actually looked like for our ancestors, the stuff they never taught you in school.